Okay, welcome. And again, I'm Melissa Rosenberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Autism Society of Maryland. Our organization serves individuals with autism and their families in Howard, Montgomery, and Anne Arundel counties and the surrounding area. We provide information, support, social opportunities, educational webinars just like this one, and advocacy. If you aren't already familiar with us, we have a wealth of information on our website, many upcoming events. I just want to share just one or two with you this evening very quickly. Closely related to tonight's topic, on Wednesday in Columbia, we're co-hosting a session with Pathfinders for Autism on what to do during a traffic stop. It's a really great hands-on training for drivers, passengers. It's in partnership with the Howard County Police Department. The event's on our website, or I'm happy to share that information with you if you'd like to get registered. It's hands-on practice. We're also breaking ground on a very exciting Patuxent Commons housing project on October 1st. And that'll also be in Columbia at 10 a.m. And we invite everybody out. We're very excited about this very inclusive, affordable project for persons with disabilities, seniors, and families. And then our Every Step Counts walk and 5K run on October 5th. Very fun, family friendly. Kids 11 and under are free. I'm sorry, under 11 are free. Lots of fun things to do and a really beautiful place to run our walk. So I hope that you'd consider coming out and joining us for that. And so I'm going to stop sharing just a minute here. And I want to welcome Ty Green, who is co-hosting with us from the Autism Society of Baltimore, to just share a few words with you right now.
Thank you, Melissa. A pleasant evening wish to each of you, and thank you again for joining us. Our mission at Autism Society Baltimore Chesapeake is to ensure that the resources we provide will help members of our autistic community live fuller lives. The resource that we are sharing this evening is intended to help each of you with the level of advocacy that you need. As a parent of two young adults on the spectrum, whose father is also a police officer, this is a welcome informational session. It is our hope that you utilize the information provided in the most beneficial way possible. These topics are difficult to talk about, but they are necessary to have. It allows all of us to walk in a space of knowledge and power and strengthens us to be better allies with law enforcement and legal representatives. I ask that you listen with a receptive heart and be positively engaging with your shares. Know that our objective is to be supportive and informative. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Ty. And I want to just take a moment now to introduce this evening's interpreter. We have a Spanish language room, if that's something that you are interested in accessing. And I'm going to invite Alicia to, Magda is going to be giving us instruction on how to access that. Magda, you want to give those instructions?
Yes, Melissa, thank you so much. Buenas tardes, yo soy Magdalena Castro Lewis de ALMA Translation and Interpretation Services here in Columbia, Maryland. Bienvenidos al webinar titulado Autismo en el Sistema Legal Penal. ¿Qué hacer si su hijo es arrestado? Las personas que necesitan escuchar esta presentación en español pueden ir a la parte de abajo de la pantalla, hacer clic en el globo y escoger la opción español. También, si esto no funciona, puede ir donde están los tres punticos y lo mismo, hacer clic ahí y escoger la opción español. También quiero recordarles a los participantes mantener sus micrófonos y cámaras apagadas para evitar interferencias durante la presentación y en la grabación. Ahora, sin más demora, le cedo el micrófono a Alicia Ardila, también cofundadora de Alma Translations e Interpretation Services. Ella va a hacer la interpretación simultánea al español. Gracias, y si tienen algún comentario también lo pueden escribir en el chat en español y también se le será respondido. Thank you.
Thank you, Magda.
You're welcome.
Okay. Okay, and now I'd like to introduce Carlene Ponder, who we're very fortunate to have serving as our moderator this evening. Carlene serves as the founding director of the Autism Justice Center, an initiative of the Autism Society of America. Carlene is an attorney and civil rights advocate working at the intersection of disability, race, and the criminal justice system. She started her legal career with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, where she combined federal litigation with public policy advocacy. Next, she served as an appellate attorney for 11 years with Social Security in its disability adjudication division. During this time, Carlene joined other grassroots advocates to advance initiatives in her local community and the state of Maryland to address a spate of police shootings involving people experiencing a mental health crisis. Before going to the Autism Society, she combined her experience as a director of disability rights for the ARC of the United States, where she championed the rights of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities before Congress and federal agencies. She received her law degree from the University of Illinois and bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Carlene.
Thank you very much, Melissa and Ty, and I'm happy to be here tonight for this very important topic, and it directly relates to the work of the Autism Justice Center. So with that, I am going to go ahead and tell you all about our wonderful panelists for the evening. We have Jeremiah Josie here. Jeremiah is a 23-year-old Maryland-based baker. He's also a model and an author and a motivational speaker. Jeremiah hosts his own cooking show on YouTube called Jeremiah's Cooking Adventures. He's had some very famous chefs on his show, including Marcus Samuelson, who some of you may know from he was on, was it America's Favorite Chef? One of those shows. But you all will know. And he was acknowledged by an honorary scholar by U.S. Foods, received a National Black Chefs Association 2019 Chefs Award, named one of the 14 top autism influencers on social media by Autism on the Mighty Community. And he is a Flutie Fellow sponsored by the Doug Flutie Jr. Foundation for Autism. And Jeremiah is joined by his wonderful mom, Simone
Aw.
Gray.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
He's 25
Oh,
and yes, Jeremiah, one of the most important things is that he did graduate from the prestigious Culinary Institute of America with an associate's degree in baking and pastry arts.
thank
So I
you
just
so
wanted
much, Simone.
to-
And then we have Brian Kelmar. Brian is the president and co-founder of Decriminalize Developmental Disabilities, D3 for short. It's a national advocacy organization focused on criminal justice reform for individuals with autism. He collaborates with families of autistic individuals entangled in the criminal justice system across the U.S. and partners with organizations in the U.S., Canada, and the U.K. He's a lead advocate for criminal justice reform, has championed 5 legislative bills related to the cause of criminal justice and autism, and IDD, and all of which have been signed into law in Virginia, which is a big deal.
Thank you.
Right? What's that?
Bravo.
Thank you.
And Brian has presented at numerous conferences, as I know I've seen him present at some of those conferences. And so he's the father of 3 sons, including one with autism. We have Kimber Watts with us this evening. Kimber is the supervising attorney, Forensic Mental Health Division, the Maryland Office of the Public Defender. Kimber heads the Forensic Mental Health Division, which means she assists attorneys with cases involving mental health issues, particularly juvenile cases and waiver and transfer hearings. As an undergraduate, before Kimber went to law school, she actually worked at a group home for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And then she went on to pursue her legal career. She started as a public defender in 1999. She's worked in juvenile court, district court, and circuit court. She has a particular expertise in working with adolescents with mental health issues. She was appointed by Governor Hogan to the Maryland Behavioral Health Advisory Commission. This commission advises the Behavioral Health Administration on matters of policy, where she currently serves as co-chair of Children, Youth, and Families Committee.
Hi, it's nice to meet you all. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Kimber. And we have Dina Crizon, and I hope I got that. Oh my God, we were practicing. And Dina's Director of Compliance and Organizational Development for the Baltimore Crisis Response Incorporated. Dina works as Director of Clinical Operations and Community Services at Baltimore Crisis Response. She has been a clinical social worker for the past 18 years, working in the public behavioral health field in Baltimore City, specializing in crisis response work. She has also worked in the mental health public policy sector as the Director of Public Policy for the Mental Health Association of Maryland. She's committed to promoting mental health wellness and recovery in Baltimore City through direct practice, advocacy, and public policy. We also have Dr. Darian Sin Carter with us tonight. He is Director of Homeland Security and the Criminal Justice Institute for the School of Business and Law at Anne Arundel Community College. Darian is a tenured professor. He's a nationally recognized leader who facilitates student engagement and success. As an educator, he believes that education plays a vital role in the community and has become immersed in rich and diverse offerings to support student success. His passion is in the development and implementation of structures to support the success of all students and regularly participates in a number of student engagement and success initiatives. Dr. Sin Carter has served in key leadership roles, including serving as a member of the American Association of Community Colleges National Faculty Council, City Council member in the city of Bowie, and the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI Citizens Academy. And with that, and I can go on and on and on, really, for all of these panelists. They all have wonderful credentials. But with that, I'm actually going to stop their formal introductions and give each of the panelists an opportunity to say just a little bit about why they're with us tonight on this particular topic around arrest and autism. So if you all, I'll call on each of you to make it a little bit easier, but if you all could just maybe think of a snapshot of what brought you to this work and what brought you to this particular topic tonight around arrest, and give us maybe a minute, 2 minutes of what that could be for you. And Simone and Jeremiah, are you ready to start?
I guess so.
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, I am a mom who is raising an African-American son with a disability. And we know, just based on what we see, that if we take just having a disability out of the equation, there is still a stigma and a fear around our sons, husbands, brothers, nephews, when it comes to racial profiling, police brutality, things of that nature. And I think that having a disability just adds to that. And so as a mom, I'm really just trying to make sure that we put forth our due diligence and we continue to fight the good fight and try to raise awareness about these issues that affect or impact that part of the population that's underserved. So that's my 2 cents on that. And I'm just grateful to be here. You know, I almost didn't make it. You know, my mom had a little bit of a fall over the weekend, and I was running around all day. So forgive me if I don't have a beat face and I look tired. But one of the things that I have instilled in my son is to honor your commitments. And this was very, very important to us. And I hope that this would not be the last conversation on the subject of what happens, you know, if you get pulled over by the police, that I hope that this is a series. This can be a series. One of
Thank you.
the many conversations to happen, because Rome wasn't built overnight. I think that I applaud all of you for engaging tonight. Like I said, I think I emailed Melissa. I was like, I don't think I'm gonna
Right.
make it. And then I just said, you know what? Sometimes we have to kind of push through. And this is very, very important, you guys. And I don't think that we're gonna solve all the answers in a Zoom call tonight. But I think if
Well,
anything,
we will try. So I want to, so these are brief comments. So I want to thank you and Jeremiah for showing up, but I know it was difficult. So thank you. And we'll come back to you. Don't
You're
worry. And we'll go next to Brian.
I'm sorry, but we didn't talk to him. I'm here because of him. I'm not here because of me. I'm here because of Jay. So
Right.
with all due respect, could we just kind of let him say two words before we go to
Sure.
Brian? If
Sure.
you don't mind,
Sure.
Brian,
Sure. No, yeah,
go ahead, Bobby.
please.
So I'm 25 years old, and sometimes I will admit I do feel ashamed of being born African American um, because of racial profiling, like Mom was saying, and that all the horrible police brutality and racism that goes on in this world. That's why we wrote Here's What I Want You to Know Too. It talks about Black Lives Matter, and to help me with my fear of police officers and stuff like that, because I don't want what happened to all the innocent Black individuals that we've lost from this world, to happen to me, or anybody else or any loved one for that matter. So that's what my life is giving.
Thank you, Jeremiah.
You're welcome.
We'll come back.
Thank you.
Okay. Brian.
So my son got caught up in the criminal justice system about 14 years ago. And when that happened to me, I was like a deer in the headlights and didn't know who to turn to, what to do. And things started snowballing from there. And we went through the criminal justice system. And at the sentencing, the judge said, unfortunately, the Commonwealth of Virginia does not recognize developmental disabilities. And I was just floored. So I said I had to do something. So I started speaking out, and I joined a webinar with the ARC of the US, and they normally have about 150 to maybe 200 people that showed up. We had over 1,000 people show up when we discussed our case. So we formed an organization of families, psychologists, lawyers, advocates, professors to address the situation is what do families do and how can we help them so they don't repeat and go through the nightmares that all of us have lived through. So we've implemented change in legislation, and we work daily with families to help them out in their situation. So that's
Thank you,
where we are.
Brian.
Thank you.
And we'll go to Kimber.
So in my career, I've represented a lot of kids whose parents have called when they were in a crisis, often due to mental health issues, sometimes developmental delays. And I've seen how those cases and situations go wrong. And so I'm thrilled to be here to be able to talk to folks about, how to make sure that those situations go right. Because nobody should ever have to be afraid of the police or ashamed of how they were born. And so whatever we can do to make that not be the case is what we're going to do.
Thank you. Dina.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here. My organization, Baltimore Crisis Response, we provide the behavioral health crisis services in Baltimore City, as well as providing mobile crisis services to Allegheny County and Garrett County. In that work that we've been doing for over the past 30 years, we see all the time that intersection between people in mental health crisis, people with developmental disabilities, as well as law enforcement. And navigating that can be challenging. And, as a mobile crisis clinician, as well as, providing services through our 988 call center, as well as our crisis units, this is something that is a constant challenge that we really try to advocate and work with people every day in this arena. And so we're really excited to be here and to talk about it and to really share with you, just from our perspective, how the crisis response field can assist and help.
Thank you so much. And now we will go to Darren.
Yes, hi everyone. So I'm here. I think my life experiences have brought me here. My entire career has been dedicated not just to education, but to empowering others. And the backdrop of that is criminal justice. My first job in high school was at a law firm. And now in the capacity, I get to teach the current and future of law enforcement and the current and future of criminal justice. And so with that, of course, I embed elements of integrity, ethics, communication, community policing, that is all essential. But on a more personal note, as an African-American male, the first time that I encountered law enforcement where they had their weapons pointed at me, I was about 14 or 15 years old. And I wish that I had known what to do in those situations. And so my role here is someone who works in this field to share best practices and what to do if you encounter a situation such as this. Also, on another personal note, I'll share that I've been really grateful to have so many experiences in my career, and I'm adding to that list, Carlene, and that is an advocate. And so as of this year, I am now also a self-advocate for autism as a recent diagnosis that I received this year. And so I am compelled to be here. I'm compelled. It is my responsibility to be here, I believe.
Well, thank you, Darren. And you are the right person for this first kickoff question, because we're here for this topic on what to do if you're arrested. So for a lot of people who aren't connected to the autism community, people may think, well, why on earth is, the Autism Society of Maryland, Autism Society of Baltimore, why are they hosting a webinar on what to do if their autistic child is arrested? Because people may think that those two things are incompatible for some reason, but this is a special topic and it has a special purpose, I think, in our particular community here. So what are some of the considerations that are unique to autistic people during such an experience?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the priority in law enforcement is safety. And so all that officers do, that what's paramount is officer safety, of course, the safety of others, but safety is paramount. And if there are instances where something or someone doesn't seem to comply with the authority of an officer, that may be seen, that non-compliance may be met with different levels of force, unfortunately. As we know, a lot of times this is because of miscommunication. And Carlene, I was looking at your website today, and the data is alarming, but to see that 30 to 50% of people killed in law enforcement are people with autism or disabilities. And so that is alarming, that is frightening to me to hear, and should be for everyone to hear. And the understanding that no, the data doesn't suggest that people with disabilities commit more crimes. The data doesn't suggest that. What it suggests is that law enforcement is not prepared to meet the challenges of communicating with those that are different.
Mm.
And so with that in mind, yes, there are a lot of different things to consider. One with autism is the way in which people with autism may process information, may communicate, and ultimately how they respond when confronted with authority or by law enforcement. And so those responses that may be atypical, those responses that may be perceived as aggressive or non-compliant, really is a response that is out of a difference in how individuals with autism think and perceive information. And stressful situation for everyone to be confronted with law enforcement, and individuals can be really overstimulated. And so there are a couple of things here that I know that we all know this, but I want to share this just because I think law enforcement isn't always aware of that. So their sensory sensitivities, such as light and touch. And so an officer has the authority and power to detain, to use force if necessary, and to take life or seize property if necessary. And so some of those things that law enforcement is able to do can be overstimulating for some individuals. And there are other ways around that. I mentioned that force spectrum. There are communication differences, and so lack of eye contact, pauses in between, or just not answering the question in the way that an officer would think someone would, given that they are in this duress state. Those are just communication differences. Misinterpretation of behaviors. And so sometimes an individual may stem or may need some time to process or may not communicate verbally in the way that an officer would like. And so those things can all be counterproductive to this process when the law enforcement is interacting with someone with autism. I have just a few others, understanding of legal rights, and Brian mentioned that. I'm so sorry to hear that experience, but it happens, it's all too common, where individuals with autism, we're not aware of our rights. And when we're confronted with an officer, yes, they're going to ask questions from an authoritative role. And believe it or not, officers are allowed to lie. And so these lines of questioning that's a part of an investigation can be intimidating for anyone, needless to say. And to navigate what those rights are can be challenging. With autism, there may be comorbidities such as anxiety. And so these situations will also bring out those elements. There is a need for accommodations. And so an officer, if you show up that you're speaking and then all of a sudden you become nonverbal or not communicating the way that an officer would like, really that person may need an accommodation. They need an advocate. There's a risk of involuntary masking. And so again, as someone who's learning still about myself as of this year, and there are situations where masking may occur, and that is really, again, out of the preservation of safety on the part of the person with autism. And I think I'll stop there.
Well, that was really, really helpful from a lot of different perspectives, from your own unique experience, unfortunately, as a child who had that scary experience, but also as a professional in the criminal justice field, an educator, and now you identify as you can identify as an autistic person. So that, I think that was helpful on a lot of different levels. And that sets me up for my question for Kimber, because now we know a little bit about why being arrested might be a unique situation. You might get a unique response from an autistic person. But Kimber, what types of cases have you seen at your office involving an autistic person who's been arrested and now they need criminal legal defense?
So I would say that my personal experiences really reflect the data that he was just talking about, that honestly, not that many people with autism get into legal trouble. One of the hallmarks is kind of rule following. So people who are rule followers don't get into too much trouble. That being said, for the most part, it's crimes that are stemming from miscommunication and not recognizing social cues and the impact that they are having on people around them. So, for example, not realizing that a friend or a classmate was loaning you something and not giving it to you, assaults that were not necessarily intended to be assaults, but that kind of arise from being overstimulated, scared, and frustrated. And unfortunately, I can say the most serious cases involve not understanding communication around consent and sexual situations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been my experience.
And are you aware that your clients are autistic, or is this something that you have to sort of figure out in the course of representing them?
So it's when I talk to my clients, and I come from a background of working with kids, but even when I've worked with adults, I always get background information about my clients. So I hope that if they are aware that they have autism, that they have conveyed that, and I have created a safe space where they're comfortable enough to talk about that. So typically, if my client is aware, hope that I am as well.
And I want you, I think maybe all of you, but definitely Kimber and Darian, to put a pin in that issue you raised around accommodations, Darian, especially when somebody is being arrested. Because that's a tricky one. I mean, when can you ask for accommodations? What kind of accommodations can you ask for? What's the officer's anticipated response if you ask for, accommodations? So I want us to come back to that one. And I want to go to Dina and talk about crisis response now, because, being arrested or just having this experience is a traumatic experience for anybody. And I'm wondering, what should autistic people know about crisis response services, Baltimore's Crisis Center, for example, in a situation like this? How could such services help?
So for us, in the crisis response field, we have mobile crisis teams as I said before, we manage 988. 988 is the new national call line for anyone who's in any type of behavioral health crisis. That means somebody in mental health crisis, somebody in a substance abuse crisis, somebody that might be going through however they define their crisis. Folks that have developmental disabilities, folks with autism, and 988 is the number that people can call. And the hope is that by calling that number, instead of calling 911, that they're going to get more appropriate help. The people on the other side of that line are trained counselors. The focus is to try to engage that individual. They have training not just about how to handle someone in mental health crisis, but also how to handle someone who's in mental health crisis that has a developmental disability, or someone that has autism. So that our hope is that we can engage those folks before it gets to a point where police intervention is, police get involved. That is really what we try to do. We're all about least restrictive environment. We're all about trying to engage an individual, whether it's through our call center, whether it's through our mobile crisis teams, which are comprised of a therapist and a nurse, or a therapist and a peer, to go out to wherever that individual is. And it could be that the mobile crisis team is their advocate. Maybe they are there to provide support and figure out what their crisis is. Remember, crisis is defined by the individual. So when we go out, we're there to kind of figure it out and in real time and look at solutions. We want to try to avoid police getting involved. Sometimes that will happen. We see police as partners. They are needed at times, but our focus is to try to prevent it getting to that point. I also just want to say that BCRI does a lot of training with Baltimore City officers. There's a program called Crisis Intervention Teams, and it's a week-long training that officers get where they learn about how to handle and de-escalate someone in mental health crisis, but also how to handle someone who may be going through a developmental disability and is in crisis. And they also learn about autism and how to help people and understand those warning signs. So it's nice to have that. It's a voluntary training, but a lot of officers decide to do it because they want to be more skilled when they go out, because they're responding to anything and everything in the community, and they often feel uncomfortable going on calls where it's more of a mental health crisis because they're not really sure how to handle that. So having this week-long training is really helpful.
And I think that's important, what you mentioned about people being familiar with 988 and being able to call that line when there's a crisis situation for help, and also Baltimore having mobile crisis teams available who can go out on location. I think it's important because we do see a lot of arrests stemming from behavioral health situations where the person or maybe their caretaker just needs a little bit of help. They don't know who to call. 911 gets called, police get dispatched, and unfortunately, too many of those situations end up with somebody being arrested, really because they're having a mental health or, a medical emergency, but it turns into what can be perceived as a crime. So
Absolutely, Carlene. And I just wanted, and I thank you for that, because I wanted to also say that in Baltimore City, for so long, people were just calling 911. And whenever they would call 911 for anything, whether they're dealing with a mental health crisis, it would then prompt a police response. Now we have a thing called 911 diversion in Baltimore City, where whenever there is any type of mental health call, whether it's someone in suicidal crisis or someone that's just going through a mental health crisis, those calls get diverted to BCRI's 988 number. So that's wonderful, because a lot of those calls that used to go to 911 are now being sent over to BCR's 988 line, where they're talking to people that are really able to engage with the person in crisis.
And that's great. And Brian, keep that in mind when I get to you, because I want you to talk about some of these initiatives legislatively too, because that didn't just happen. I mean, people push for that to happen. So, but I want to go to Jeremiah now. And Jeremiah, I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about the incident that occurred with police at the airport. I know you told me about it, but I think it would be important for our audience to hear some of what you've personally experienced.
Thank you. So there was one time where me and my mom were both traveling to Wisconsin, I think, for a modeling opportunity. And when we were at the airport waiting for our flight, there was this Caucasian woman who was in deep distress because she missed her flight. She was crying and just in deep in distress. And that's when me and my mom both went over to her to comfort her. And we asked her, "Are you okay? Is there anything we can help with?" And she said, "No, she's not okay. She missed her flight." And so we just sat around and comforted her, gave her some, accompanying, and then that's when things went left, is when mom left.
If I may interject, I did ask her for a phone and asked her if there was anyone that I could call, and was able to talk to her mom and to let her mom know, what was going on. And then they were able to put her on a different flight. So I'm gonna let him pick up. So again, spoke to the mom. She also had a support dog, as Jeremiah has a support dog. Joseph, say hi. Say hi, Joseph. Joseph is Jeremiah's support dog. So she had her support dog, and Jeremiah, take it from there.
So then after she got another flight, that's when mom went somewhere to get like a cup of coffee or something. And then that's when I sat with her to keep her company. And so when we sat together, it was totally innocent. We just talked about what I do, how I'm an autism advocate, I'm a model and pastry chef and all. It was just a brief, innocent, appropriate kind of conversation. And that was until an officer or a security guard came by and to us, and they were like, "Is everything okay here?" And I told the officer, "Yeah, everything's fine." And then that's when things got bigger and bigger as he reported like a racial profiling um, thing.
Can I interject? So at the time when after we made sure that she got on another flight and I talked to her mom, I wasn't sitting in the vicinity where Jeremiah was. with the young lady. I was kind of sitting at our gate. And if you've been to maybe, let's just say Southwest, the gates are somewhat side by side. So I could see gate 13 and 14. We're gate 14, she's gate 13. So I was sitting off to the side. I think what was shocking was it wasn't one police officer, it was two police officers that had surrounded Jeremiah and the young lady. And what was said, someone called and thought maybe it could have been an issue of sex trafficking, you know, which was just incredibly shocking. I think I was so taken aback and so appalled because we did nothing but just try to help somebody who was in need. And the third officer that showed up, if it were not for him who recognized my son, so this all was squashed when he said, "You look familiar. Where have I seen you from? You were on Steve Harvey's show." And he was absolutely right. My son was on Steve Harvey's show. So that ended up being a photo op for his wife. And him calling his wife and an apology. And then if you are an African-American woman and you start kind of saying something like they judge you, and I'm highly educated, I have a whole master's degree, like, but if I, God forbid, said, "Oh my God, I can't believe all of the people in the waiting room saw what went down and from beginning to end," and you said nothing to put my son in this situation was just really traumatic. But that's kind of what happened, you know, and racial profiling doesn't mean like you're behind a wheel of a car. Racial profiling can be my son is taking out the trash. A call comes in and he has on a hoodie and they're trying to fit a description, and then my son's all caught up. So to me, there's just so much more to this than meets the eye. And I did want to say something as Brian was talking, and I think it's amazing what he's doing and what he's talking about. But I think that what we need to kind of pay attention to is that we are now just kind of getting into this conversation about mental health. And I don't care how you want to slice it, how you want to dice it. Autism is very, very unique characteristics. You can't just say, now we're going to talk about mental health and what police need to do to help mental health. Autism is very unique, very certain unique characteristics. And I will always go back to education. Mental health is now being talked about. That's great. But autism is something that it's sort of, to me, is the disability that's seen and unseen, because we're dealing with a spectrum. My son's high functioning autistic. So what about the kids who are nonverbal? What about all of that? Like, we got to have a robust conversation. And I'm so sick and tired of talking about all of this. You know, now I just feel it comes down to actions. Like, what are we going to actually like do? And I do believe that education has to start with the police and educating them, because
So,
we have mental health, but we also have people with autism, and their unique set of circumstances, because we're dealing with a spectrum and not everyone is the same. Like, at the end of the day, I just
right.
think it comes down to education. That's
All right.
my 2 cents.
But Jeremiah, so going back to that day when you were at the airport, do you remember how you felt or how you responded when the officers came up to you?
I was a little bit confused and at the same time a little bit nervous too, because like Mom said, we did nothing but just make sure that a person who was distressed needed help. And yeah, I was just mostly confused and a little nervous and didn't understand why it happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to say this, and it doesn't always come down to racial profiling, but the officers were white when they approached my son. It was the Black officer that recognized my son, who had been on Steve Harvey, not one time, 3 times. So he knew my son, but he was sort of like the last on the scene. And I guess he tried to kind of make it okay. But as far as I was concerned, the damage had been done. The damage had been done because we had people sitting in an area that saw everything from beginning to end go down. Like there was nothing threatening about what I would do, like for anyone's child, I mean, the girl was just out of control. She was crying profusely and actually was trying to make the flight to go see her therapist. So it was a little disheartening. It was one for the history books. It's something, though, I don't think you ever get over. I think it's something that you just kind of learn to accept. And I have had to just talk to Jeremiah, about it. But yeah, that's what happened.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing that story that impacted you both. And Brian, hearing all of this, you're a parent, you've been through some of this personally yourself.
Yep.
You're an advocate, you're a lobbyist. What do we need to do on the legislative level around these issues?
Thank you. So your story, unfortunately, I've heard many times. I work with families all over the country. And what I tell people, we have to change the laws. The criminal justice system does not take into account developmental disabilities, nor does the police response. And the only way we can change that is through advocacy and changing the laws. So I, along with the other, I always say, pissed off parents that have gotten these situations, we went and met with legislators, and we were just parents, and we pushed for legislation to change. Some key ones that we've done is one is when 988 was just rolling out, we had a bill called the Marcus Alert. And the Marcus Alert had to do with a young Black man who was a teacher who was having a mental breakdown, and he ran out of his car, took off all his clothes, and ran into the middle of I-95. Well, the way they stopped him was with a 9mm, and they killed him. So what we had come up with is a bill that says if someone is having a mental health crisis, that there needs to be people trained in mental health. And I was a big advocate on this. I said, well, that's good, but mental health is one thing and developmental disabilities is a different thing. And autism, and trying to get them to understand that autism was completely different and different responses. So we were able to get into the legislation to say, and or if it's a developmental disability, that someone is trained in autism or developmental disabilities to respond, and not a mental health. Because just because you're a mental health provider doesn't mean that you know everything about everything. In fact, as I say, a mental health provider is like a general practitioner trying to tell you how to do heart surgery, right? You want somebody specialized in developmental disabilities and autism. So we passed that bill. We were able to pass 3 bills in the first year that we tried this. And as I said, I was just people go, are you a lawyer? Are you this? Or you're a lobbyist? I said, nope, just a parent. And the 3 bills that we passed was one, a lot of times our individuals get caught up in the criminal justice system because of inappropriate behaviors, because they're not taught this of social norms, social taboos, what's good, what's not, how to stay off the internet. So we introduced legislation that said, the first line of defense, in my opinion, was to train people that are autistic. And what we came out with was, as part of the IEP individual education plan of K through 12, so starting in kindergarten, continuing every single year, all the way through 12th grade, not just this 2-week course that the kids get in junior high. This starts in kindergarten from very basic training of how to interact what's appropriate situations and what's inappropriate. And it's all age developmentally designed. So if you have a 6-year-old and he's really more like a 3-year-old, they design it more towards that, and on. So that when you even get up to dating is like, no means no. What do you do in these situations? And explains that. So that became law. Unfortunately, it just rolled out this year into the public school systems. And we passed that in 2020. The next one that we had, which was an important one, like my son, if you get caught up in the criminal justice system, it's like a conveyor belt. It doesn't stop.
Mhm.
And there's only one way you're getting off. And there's a guilty plea involved. Because you're going to have 95% of the cases in the United States are handled through plea bargaining. So you're either going to plea bargain or you're going to court. And what happens at the end is, what about taking into account autism? So what we did was pass a bill that says, if you get into the sentencing phase, that diversion should be considered in autism cases. And that has been a very successful bill. I just testified on Friday for a case on getting people removed from felony cases and actually have diversion. And we do have diversion training that we recommend them to. So that was a big one. The next thing is, well, what happens if you get into prison? What do you do? Because they say there's all these people with mental illness that are in prison. Well, there's no real definition. And really, a lot of those people are autistic. So how do you handle that? So what we did is work with the Department of Corrections here in Virginia and came out with policies. We taught, Darian talked about sensory issues. So lights, sounds, touch, smell, all those things that happen in prison. I explained to him, that's like fingers on a chalkboard, 24/7. So
Yeah.
what are policies and ADA requirements that you have to implement in your policies in the prisons? So we did that, and there's been some major changes. And then the last one, I was going to name after my son, but my son wouldn't let me, is when I heard that you can't take into account their disability throughout the entire criminal justice system until you get to the sentencing phase. So you can say it's an autistic issue and related, but you can't really bring it in as evidence until you get to the sentencing phase. They don't care. So we wrote a bill and changed that law so that from the very beginning of the process, that if there's a suspicion, and there's not usually a suspicion, usually every parent knows that there's autism or developmental disabilities, that must be taken into account and be allowed into the court at the very beginning of the criminal justice system. And this is very big, is making sure that this happens and people recognize it. And all of these laws have come out, and they all passed unanimously. So this is by Democrats and Republicans. And why? Because I said, and they understand, autism does not discriminate. It
Right.
doesn't matter. It's still 1 in 36 here in Virginia. It's 1 in 27 have autism. And it doesn't matter who you are, what politician you're for, or what party you're from, it's still going to be 1 in 27, and people understood that. And all 4 passed, and we were able to get that into law and signed by the governor, and I was able to attend that signature. One that we just worked on last year is where we are now required that all law enforcement in the state of Virginia are required to get education in autism. So we've had CIT, and some of the CIT critical intervention teams that are trained. Some have it, some don't, some are better than others. The definition of what that means and what that training looks like was very broad. So someone could have a really great training, and some could be, here's autism, you got it, good, you're trained. So we implemented that law last year, and that's been rolling out. And then one other part of our diversion process is that if you are a public defender, you have to have a minimum of 4 hours training in autism before you can defend a client.
That's something that you're working on?
Now, that
or
one actually passed. That was actually part of
in Virginia now, that's a
required.
requirement? Well, look at that.
Because what we found is a lot of times I work with lawyers and psychologists, and especially families. I jump in, usually I'll get the calls on a Friday night, said, my son's in trouble, what do I do? And then I get a kind of team, I reach out to Carlene and some of the others that we work with, lawyers, and we figure out what are the things that we can work with. And one of the things we found is a lot of lawyers, especially defense lawyers and public defenders, and Carlene and our group actually helped write a pamphlet on how to defend but they wouldn't understand, they wouldn't take the time to understand their nuances about autism and the criminal justice system. One of the things of one of our legislation basically says mens rea, which means, do they really understand the situation of what they've been arrested for and what they've are committed or being charged with? And 99% out of 100, the answer is no. And I think somebody has mentioned it's very black and white to individuals. It's autism, either you, here it is, and then they're very rule bound, or no, you have to do social understandings and interpretation, and nope, they're not going to pick that up. So they get in trouble for that, and they don't understand. And then when you explain it to them and you train them, yes, they will never do it again. In fact, we have recidivism usually at 0 once we've trained them. So those are some big legislation things. One things that I'm working on, the only one I'm working on right now is the diversion, is we're trying to move that up to the beginning of the process. So it immediately after there's interaction with the police and even at the magistrate, is there an opportunity to diversion? Because what we're trying to do is keep our autistic individuals out of the criminal justice system. And that's why we're called decriminalized developmental disabilities.
That would be the goal.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Brian. And so now I want to get into some of the nuts and bolts. You are being arrested, could be for any reason, any number of things. What are the top 3 things, Kimber, Darian, you would advise people to do if arrested?
Do you want me to go first, Darian, or do you want to?
It doesn't matter.
I'll start. My first thing is ask for a lawyer. Actually, that's not true. My first thing is stay as calm as you can. Because as we've heard, police are dealing with a lot of stressful situations. They come in, they want everybody to be safe. They do that by taking control, which can be, for anybody who's a little stressful in return, because you don't understand why they're trying to take control or how they're trying to do it or really what's going on, right? So rule 1, stay as calm as you can, even if they approach you assertively or aggressively, even though it's a hard thing to stay calm. If you're having trouble understanding what's going on, tell them, I don't understand. If you're getting, trouble controlling your emotions, it's okay to say, I have autism. I need my parent. I need a lawyer. I need somebody to help me, and have a plan in place to deal with stressful situations in general. So after you've stayed calm, and I know, good luck with that, ask for a lawyer. There is no circumstance where it can hurt you to have an attorney with you while you talk to the police. Darian probably has better ideas than I do about what kind of accommodations police can make, but I know the one accommodation they have to make is if you ask for a lawyer, they can't keep asking you questions without an attorney. I think a thing that's really critical for parents in Maryland to know is that we had some really good successes legislatively 2 years ago with the Child Interrogation Protection Act. And so while it is not the case that police can't talk to your children, if they're interrogating them, they have to let them talk to an attorney first. And we will absolutely call you. The police are now also required to call you. But for parents in Maryland, kids are allowed to, and in fact, police have to let them talk to an attorney. There's a hotline that's manned 24/7 with people specially trained in how to talk to kids. And that includes kids with autism, of course. That being said, there are also bills that will be coming up in the legislative session to make sure that cops can't lie to kids, because kids, particularly kids with developmental disabilities and autism, are uniquely susceptible to making false statements to the police because they think that's what the police want to hear. And so, if you're interested in being involved with any of that advocacy, please feel free to reach out. My third tip is be prepared. So it's really pretty helpful that there's a traffic stop training going on. I think, frankly, more citizens should have access to that kind of thing, because most people don't know how those work or what to do. So I would say if you're going to be driving, or if your child is going to be driving, take that kind of training. Talk to your kids about how traffic stops work and how to behave during traffic stops, because that's one of the ways in which almost every driver interacts with a police officer at some point in time. And my last thing I would say is, if you're accused of something, don't try to explain yourself. You'll have the ability to do that later when you're calmer and more collected. So again, ask for a lawyer or say that you want to remain silent.
And Kimber, on that sort of false confession thing, so a situation might be the cop is talking to a kid who happens to be autistic and says, "Hey, you knew your friend was going to rob that store, didn't you?"
Yep.
He goes,
Oh,
no, I didn't know.
absolutely.
No, I didn't know. Officer goes, yeah, no, but weren't you and he best friends? And if the two of you were best friends, then you would know what your best, you know.
Right. I know you're lying to me. Now I need you to tell me the truth. And by the way, this is the truth.
And the kid goes, okay, officer.
Okay.
Yes, you're right.
Mm.
You're the officer. Yes, you're right. So being susceptible to that kind of intimidation, authority figure, pressure, people pleasing. People pleasing is also a unique characteristic, right? Sometimes that autistic people can display.
Well, because, you know, I think all kids want to do that. All kids are susceptible to those tactics, but particularly kids with autism who want to follow the rules, who want to do the right thing. It is all too easy to get them to endorse false statements.
Mm-hmm. Darian?
Oh, sure. I think we were very much aligned. My top three, my first was to stay calm and composed, which for all the reasons I said earlier, can be more challenging for individuals with autism. But to try to stay as calm as composed as possible. If not, what happens is when we're feeling overwhelmed or panicked is that may escalate the response of law enforcement. And so staying calm and composed can be a part of de-escalation. To practice some things such as just taking deep breaths and trying to remain focused in a situation that can be really challenging. My second was to exercise your right to remain silent. And so you do not have to speak. You could exercise your Fifth Amendment right. Please do not feel pressured to answer any questions that you don't feel comfortable answering or you're not sure how to answer. You can politely but firmly indicate to an officer that you would like to remain silent. And the third one that I had was to request an attorney. If you're in a situation that present moment is not the time to argue or try to find justice or advocacy, to lean into an attorney. And Kimberly, I think that also takes me to my three things not to do, which were do not resist arrest. And so for all the things that I mentioned earlier, with the sensory stimulation, so be in touch when you don't want to be touched, right? It can be a lot for anyone, but certainly a lot for individuals with autism. So do not resist arrest. We talked about just the confusion about what's going on. And so even if you are confused and you know you didn't do anything wrong, that isn't the time to resist arrest. Law enforcement, their role is safety, and they're doing an investigation. And so anything that you share is a part of an investigative process for an officer. And so please do not volunteer information. Again, that goes back to remaining silent. And so sometimes individuals with autism, for the things that Carlene and Kimberly stated, may want to give information to show I really didn't do anything. Hey, I'm here, I didn't do anything. And you're volunteering information, but that information can be used against you. And then the last is one of the things Kimberly mentioned is that you may be confronted with aggression or assertiveness or authority. And even if that's the case, sometimes officers may even be disrespectful, unfortunately. And even if that's the case, it is not the place to argue. It is not the place to return that disrespect that you feel. Again, there's a time and a place for that comes later through our advocacy when you request that attorney.
Kimberly, what should people absolutely not do in this situation?
He's 100% right. Resisting arrest, and when we talk about resisting arrest, we're not necessarily just talking about throwing punches. It's like jerking away. I mean, very nearly anything can be resisting arrest. And the problem becomes compounded if you, for example, push an officer or try and swat their hand away. Then you've also got assault on a police officer tacked onto that. So that is absolutely what you should not do. Don't panic.
I want to ask because unfortunately for a lot of autistic people, and you all touched on this, sensory sensitivities are real and emotions are very high already in a situation where there's an officer probably maybe barking at you and not being very respectful. But if you have a sensory sensitivity and somebody's touching you roughly, and maybe they've got the lights, the lights on the cars, the bright lights, or who knows, sirens, any of that stuff. There are situations, and I know one, it's just horrible, where the young autistic person, had sort of a fight or flight response and got charged very heavily and convicted and just horrible things, but all stemming from the way that person was treated as an autistic person being arrested. What are the what can you do then? What do you do as a defense attorney? I mean, what do you?
Can I say something?
Yes.
I would be remiss if I didn't say this, and I'm struggling to we have to have the conversation that we must include adults who are nonverbal. Because to your point, missing cues and sensory issues affect nonverbal autistic adults as well. So we're going to have to think about it or figure it out, because that's something that we can't ignore. I'm sorry. We're talking about autism as it's very broad, but
and you're absolutely right. The challenge
nonverbal
for
autistic children who may have limited speech impairment, who may start out being nonverbal, but at some point can acquire language. But they also will have difficulty with the characteristics that we're trying to get others to see, i.e., limited ability to express emotional or read others' emotions, overwhelmed by sensory challenges, repetitive body movements, so on and so forth.
I think I can add something to that. I think one is that if the individual is able to communicate verbally, just to indicate, I'm autistic, and we've moved a lot. We moved the needle a little bit closer to where we need to be. We're nowhere near it, but thanks to the work of people like Brian and Kimberly here, we're moving the needle where there may be some offers that, oh my goodness, this individual's autistic. Maybe I will call in to have someone. Maybe I will approach this differently. It's probably the first thing that I would say. But beyond that, if the officer asks for your ID, you could get a disability card from motor vehicle. And when you hand them the ID, you hand that along with them to the officers. Another practice that I would also recommend. But yes, I think what you're saying is there's some individuals that are nonverbal, and there are other individuals that in these heightened stressful situations may become less verbal, right? Maybe we're verbal normally, but in this situation, I don't know how to speak. The words I can't find sometimes. And so I think that's really important. And I hope that the 988 and the training that's happening, we're moving the needle a little bit, but you're absolutely correct.
And we're gonna get to you, Dina, on that, but I want Kimberly to answer. I mean, these are the situations. So what do? You got an assault charge now.
I think you have to have a plan. So an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, right? Generally speaking, I think you know your child well enough to know first if they're nonverbal, or second, if they are verbal, but in stressful situations may become nonverbal, to have that card that's identifying what your issues are that you can give to somebody, or even maybe just have it on your dashboard or someplace where you can easily reach it without going into your pockets, because that can be seen as like perhaps going for a weapon. So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But then when you're charged, the key is to make sure that you have open conversations with an attorney. certainly never represent yourself. And in Maryland, at least, we have very, we have a statewide public defender system. Most people are going to qualify. If they can't afford an attorney, they will likely qualify for our services. So immediately tell your attorney that. I'm happy to talk more about this whenever you would like me to, Carlene, but I can tell you all the different ways, starting at bail review, frankly, where it matters and where your diagnosis of autism will matter to the courts.
Okay. And Dina, so you've heard a lot about the differences between mental health in general and autism. We need crisis services. Are our crisis services being developed in a way that they're going to be helpful to people who are on the spectrum? Somewhere on the spectrum is wide. So what are we doing? Are we doing any particular training around autism or developmental disabilities? Do we need to do that with our crisis services?
Yeah, no, I agree with Brian what he was saying about generalists. I think that, as a crisis provider, I think we're very good at responding to anyone in a crisis, and crises are defined by the individual. However, I feel that we, just like Darian was saying, I mean, we're making steps, moving that needle, but there's more to do. 100%. I can tell you with 988, and the funding that has come with it to expand our, call centers, as well as to expand our mobile crisis team. So there are more crisis teams and less police intervention in situations where a person's in a crisis that may appear to be a behavioral health crisis. But then when you get to the scene, there's a lot more going on. Possibly the person also has autism. What's happening? How do you engage that individual? But in many instances, I think it's a whole lot better to have a mobile crisis team responding where you have a clinician and a peer or a nurse versus sending police out, because it just gets, there's a lot of stimulus. It's the lights flashing, lots of people that come on the scene with lights flashing. I mean, with Baltimore Crisis Response, we go in nondescript cars. We don't even have anything on our cars. We wear regular clothes. We don't even wear things that say BISA or I on them, we're going into communities because people want us to be there. But we also are very mindful of, we are guests and we're coming into a neighborhood. So we don't want to really announce it to the community. We're there to help that person in crisis in that moment in time. I think that 100% we are getting more training than ever before, especially working with people with autism. Because I have to say, I found that statistic interesting that Brian shared, because I did not know about the one in, I believe you said 24, Brian. Which
1 in 27.
127, and thank you. And they say 1 in 5 in mental health. All right. But the reality is, so many times when I'm working in the mental health crisis space, whether it's a mobile crisis team or crisis units or on our call center, there is such a crossover with folks that have autism. I see it more and more. And I think that we have gotten better at recognizing some of the signs and symptoms that we're seeing with those individuals, but we as a community need to get more training, 100%. So whether that's a legislative fix or whether that's more training that's required through our boards, like I have the board, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so possibly the professional boards requiring it through legislation. I don't know, but I think it definitely needs to happen. As I was saying when I first started out, police get training. It's a week-long voluntary program called CIT, Crisis Intervention Teams, but it's just a week-long training. And you're right, Brian, like you said, some training can be really good and some may not be as good. And so that needs to improve as well. So overall, I think we have a long way to go, but we're doing more than we ever did before.
Thank you so much, Dina. And Jeremiah, I want to ask you, having gone through the experience that you went through at the airport, what do you think would be helpful? Like, what would have been helpful for you that day at the airport with those officers?
I think, to be honest, what would be helpful is if my mom were around to give me some accommodations on how to, um, what to say or and how to act towards the police officers, just so I stay calm and, be able to articulate to them what really happened instead of what they thought happened.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So that sounds like we need to do a lot. We need to do a lot more work on both sides as organizations, preparing our kids, right, for these unpleasant encounters because they may happen. And then, of course, with making sure that police officers are familiar with different forms of disability.
Yes.
And I wanna make sure that we leave time for questions from our audience members. So I think, Brian, I'm just going to give you the last question before we open it up to the audience for questions, if that sounds all right with you, Melissa and Ty, in terms of timing. You can let me know.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, great. So Brian, you went through a personal experience.
So all of these accounts and were right in line with everyone. And I come across these situations with the thousands of other parents that I work with, is law enforcement or even in the schools, people will say, I just want to ask you some questions. In fact, my son wasn't read his rights until he was in handcuffs. And he had already shared information that was incriminating. And Darian, I think you hit it spot on. Anything can. No, it's not anything can. Anything will be used against you. Anything you say will be used against you and can be misinterpreted, especially in autism. The issues we had is fight or flight. Autistics are more prone on the fight or flight than the executive function. It's like, oh, okay, calm down. This is okay. It's just the police. But when the police arrive at your door at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're an autistic, it's hard to calm down and get in those situations. So one of the things I tell parents is the first thing is teach your children to say, if somebody says, I want to ask you questions, just say, I would like my parent or my advocate present with me. And if it's police, you say, I want a lawyer. And both of you are just so spot on. They can't ask you any more questions. And I had to tell that to my son. The other issues that I come across is, what do you do once they're arrested? The most important thing that I wanted to do, and I tell parents, is you need to get them out of jail immediately. Jail is the most terrifying. Jeremiah, what you went through, that it's PTSD that it causes, and long-term, even mental illness, depression, and anger from this situation for life. So you need to get them out of jail immediately. I do recommend you call us. We find lawyers that are qualified. One of the things I did not have a qualified lawyer that, number one, understood autism, and number two, actually worked those cases. It turned out he was a drunk driving lawyer. And that's how my son ended up with 10 years supposed to go in prison and on the registry for life, of which I had a success story in changing that. But so find a lawyer, find a psychologist who is trained in forensic autism psychology and can prove to the write up a report that says this incident occurred because this person had autism, and here's how the two connect. And that needs to happen as soon as possible, because the sooner you get in there talking to the prosecutor or the courts of this is the situation and this is why, and here's a professional explains it, the better off you go, because once that ball starts rolling, it turns into a nightmare and it does not stop. So those were some key lessons learned, and I actually had a handout that I've shared with Melissa of what to do for parents once that happens.
So we have resources that will be shared, I think, after this event for attendees.
We
And
will
I want to
share
thank
them.
all of you. I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for attending and sharing with us your personal experience, your professional experience. I really think that I gained a lot out of this. So I'm hoping that our audience tonight gained a lot out of this as well. But I also want to make sure that we get some questions in from some of the attendees. And Melissa, how are we doing the questions? I forgot.
That's all right. Ty is gonna is checking for questions. I have a couple others that came through online. So Ty, are you seeing any in the chat?
I did see one major one that came to me directly, but I believe it was addressed. And that was essentially, you know, are we going to talk about what to do if this happens? And we just did. So hopefully that addressed that question.
So if you have any questions, now would be the time. I think we want people to put them in the chat.
Okay, I just got one more. It says, what more is being done about the intersectionality of Black children with autism?
So around criminal, I'm guessing that's around criminal justice issues, and that Jeremiah, Simone, Darian, you may want to.
Their interactions with police.
I say that I want to commend Brian and for all of the work that he's done in Virginia. I just think that there just needs to be some synergy around us kind of putting in place things in PG County. That's where we live. So whereas it's great for Virginia, I don't know what's happening in Prince George's County. I mean, and I think just to piggyback off of all of the things that Brian has stated, it just would be great to have that information. And to Jeremiah's point, I think that sometimes what happens, you never know how you're going to respond in a situation until you're confronted with it. So it was news to me to hear him say, like, just to try to prepare him for the what ifs. So that's what I would say, because not all of our Black boys are going to end up in jail because they're driving cars and being pulled over by the police for some type of traffic infraction. There are many of our African-American males, boys, that are racially profiled. And I mean that wholeheartedly, just walking down the street. Jeremiah wearing a hoodie and being questioned about where do you live? You know, it just could be anything. But I think that what Brian said was just great information, power for the course, and let's just see how we can sort of, you know, get that going in the areas where we live. Would be
If I
my
can add,
response.
so we just don't, the reason I did it in Virginia is because I live here.
Mhm.
And we actually are working on it nationally, and we are working with other states.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned to Melissa that we would work with them, but we're actually working with people in Louisiana. So our parents are our biggest advocates, and then I work with them one-on-one on trying to pass similar legislation. And we've done this in Illinois and New York. We're trying to push the same legislation. So
It's
this is not just
commendable.
Virginia. Thank you.
It's
It's not just
commendable.
Virginia. If you want help in doing that, feel free to reach out to me. I
promise I
work
will.
directly with parents and I help them step by step.
You're to be commended.
And I think, Darian, you were going to say something.
Oh, yes, I wanted to just address that question. It's a really great question, and I don't think, unfortunately, any of us, we have the answers. I think that where we are is we're starting to broaden our understanding just a little bit about what autism is. And historically, it was from a male, white perspective, white male perspective. And so because of that, minorities like myself, were missed in diagnoses throughout the process. And so I think we're starting to get there. We're starting to recognize that there are maybe some cultural differences that shows up for people with autism. and that we're here. I think someone gave the number 1 in 26 or something along those lines, that it's here and it's just been a little hidden, and that number is expected to increase, I think, in the next 10 to 15 years.
Right.
And so we're just at the beginning of this process, unfortunately.
And then Kimber and Dina, there's a question about autistic transgender people. A lot of autistic people are also members of LGBTQ plus. And there are definitely issues around policing and transgender people in general. And so I'm wondering if the two of you can address the question, growing awareness on the overlap of trans people can wind up arrested because sometimes police may see a trans person and think that they are a sex worker, and then autism, you add autism to that, and it just compounds the issues. Anything in particular from your two camps?
You know, it's so hard to know how it's hard to avoid that situation because somebody's just looking at you and making a determination by the way you look. There's nothing you can do about that. But I think what you can do is, speak your truth. I'm autistic. I need an advocate. I need my mom. I need my lawyer. I need somebody. I need help. And I think that there's no shame in knowing who you are and what you need and advocating for yourself in that way.
And I just want to add to that really quickly. I agree in speaking your truth, and that's what really led me here today. And so I'm African American, I'm a part of the LGBTQ community, and I'm autistic. And so I certainly understand intersectionality. And I think that me having the courage to speak my truth and others that are here today is a way that we're going to continue to change and shape our society in a better way.
Great. And then Dina, any particular?
Yeah, I would just echo what Darren and Kimber said. And I would also just add that especially in the transgender community, they have one of the highest rates of suicide. And we have to be really mindful of that. And then think about transgender folks who are also autistic and that lack of understanding that people may have. And like Kimber said, making quick judgments on the spot without really being able to engage or understand how to engage a person when they may be dealing with a crisis and they're autistic and they're trans. So it can be really challenging, but I just want everyone to know, I mean, they have one of the highest rates of suicide. So we all need to be more aware of how to better work with this population.
Thank you. And then we got one that's near and dear to me, and as the director of the Justice Center, and also Brian Kelmar. Brian, you mentioned the term forensic psychologist. What is that? And why would that be important in an arrest situation?
So forensic psychologists, they all think about what is it, NCIS or something like that afterwards. They're basically post evaluating what happened in the case, and they're looking back and they look at the situation. They talk to the parents, they talk to the individual, they talk to people involved, and they try and put together, okay, this person did this because at that point they were having an overload, or this person said that he did it because a lot of people with autism have like something like called echolalia. And I think Kimber hit on it. It's like, did you killed the president, you killed President Kennedy, right? And they'll go,
I
killed President Kennedy. You go, you weren't born yet. You told me, so I do. So it's important that you have a psychologist that can put the pieces together and here's specifically of their development, and here's how they react because they do have echolalia, or they do have a not be able to interpret the situation. Fight or flight, that's one of the laws that we're fighting right now. Is here in Virginia, it's a felony if you hit a police officer, and that does not mean hit. That could be whacking your hand in front of that police officer, and a minimum of 6 months in jail, up to 5 years. So explaining that this person was having a meltdown and saying this is why, because they had a sensory issue, because you came in with the lights and the sounds, and this person reacts very negative when that happens, and explains that situation and puts the two. And we have the top psychologists throughout the country, and actually we work with across the planet with other psychologists in other areas that address these specific issues in detail of this person's specific action and this person's specific issue with autism and why that occurred. And that is so
Kimberly,
critical.
thank you, Brian. And Kimberly, criminal defense attorney, what good is a forensic psychology when you're psychologist when you're handling it?
Actually, that's 90% of my job is working with forensic psychologists and attorneys, helping them figure out how to best advocate for our clients. The forensic psychologist is helpful in not just showing, you know, why they may have done something, but in why they may have made a false statement, whether they're competent to stand trial. Because certainly, you know, autism has a huge spectrum, you know, and not everybody on that spectrum will be able to assist in their defense or understand the nature of the proceedings. So that's the first question. But in Maryland, I'm happy to say, I'm sorry to hear that Virginia is not like this, but in Maryland, you know, if you have an attorney who is aware of the situation, they can make it an issue at every stage of the case. And that is how we train our attorneys.
Thank you. And here's one that I think is really important for the audience tonight. And if the question is, if an autistic adult is physically aggressive and assaultive to someone in the community, how much influence can a caregiver or parent have with the police in that moment? What should they do to interact with police, especially if the person is not necessarily as verbal or minimally verbal? And I mean, I can think of, you know, many situations where it may be the caregiver. It could be a caregiver at a group home, or it could be a grandmother who's living with an autistic kid, and, you know, they call police for some help, but then police get overly aggressive. I've seen situations turn out horribly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter that the caregiver is there, but are there things that the caregiver could do? Darian, Kimberly, Dina, please.
Well, I can start off. I mean, just being a crisis provider and working in mobile crisis, you know, we rely on the people that know that individual, because that individual, they can tell us what their baseline is. They can tell us what's going on. If the individual is nonverbal or is overwhelmed and is not able to really verbalize what's going on with them, you know, we really lean on the caregiver. We really lean on whoever is that person's support system. So I think that that is really helpful. You know, I would also say that, you know, a lot of times, and I'm just speaking for people in Baltimore City, when police encounter a situation like that, they will often call mobile crisis to also come out to try to make meaning of what's happening. Although there are a lot of times when, you know, that could not happen because, you know, like everyone said, I mean, they have to make split decisions and they have to, you know, get control over the situation. But I think we do a better service for all of us if we're able to really listen to that caregiver, that advocate for that individual.
If I could add something. Oh, some of the things that our parents do, especially in smaller towns, is they actually reach out to the police before anything happens and say, look, I have a son who has autism and he has these overaggressive behaviors. And if this happens, you call me, or whatever it may be, so that they understand when a police responds, they go, oh, this is Brian's son. We understand. Okay, we got to handle this differently. So being a little proactive is also very helpful.
Anybody else want to?
Yes, I think I'll add just one thing. I think I like positive language sometimes, and so advocating what works well for your child. And so my child works best in this environment, or my child prefers this in these situations. So it doesn't seem as the child is the challenge or the problem.
Well, thank you. I know that we okay, Melissa says that because I think we need to wrap up. Melissa says we have a question about training for police in Maryland. What is offered to county versus state police? Is it voluntary only? Darian.
I can speak a little bit to that. And the Maryland Police and Correctional Training Commission has objectives that all law enforcement agencies in the state of Maryland are required to teach and train their recruits. And there currently is a revision of all of the objectives. And in this new round of objectives, mental health and disabilities and autism is addressed in these new objectives. And so the police academy at my institution, our next police academy, we're required to teach certain methods and objectives within our academy, just like every other police department in the state of Maryland. And I haven't taken a look at those just yet, but it is coming in the new objectives.
Great. Kimberly, do you know anything about police training requirements in Maryland?
Not a thing.
Right. I believe the counties can institute their own training from what I understand. It's county by county.
Additional training, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can
Ty?
speak, I can speak to Baltimore County and Baltimore City. You know, we Baltimore City works hand in hand with the Baltimore Crisis Center, right? So they have firsthand experience with that. And Baltimore City was also the first recipients of one of these booklets that we have, which is a communication facilitator. So if they come upon someone who is either nonverbal or has been rendered silent in that moment due to everything else happening sensory-wise, they can utilize this booklet to help them get communication, at least the basic communications. And it's equipped with like a QWERTY board and everything. If they want to say, well, spell your name or things of that nature, or give me a phone number that I can call someone for you, because we do know that in that moment they can be rendered silent. And I'm proud to say, with the help of Pathfinders, this booklet is now being processed for Baltimore County as well. So then now we can say that every officer in Baltimore City and Baltimore County will have one of these booklets before this year ends.
Great. And I the questions keep rolling in, but I think, as Simone said at the beginning, we really could do a part 2 and a part 3 to this and cover different topics. So I want to thank all of you for hanging in there with us. And I want to turn it back over to Melissa now, because I want her to explain how resources will get to attendees after the events, and people may want to follow up with some of our panelists specifically. So
that's great. Thanks. And then Ty's gonna bring it all home. But yes, we will be, give us a few days. We'll share the video, English and Spanish, and a resource list. If you're registered, you'll get that. And then it'll go on both of our websites. Ty will share it out. We'll share it out. And I want to thank everybody. And I know Ty's gonna thank all of our guests tonight and attendees.
Yes. So it is our hope that you utilize the information that we provided in the most beneficial way possible. These are, as I said, topics that were difficult to talk about, but they were necessary. And I hope that you were able to grab some takeaways from tonight's session for your specific cases. There are many scenarios that were covered and many more that were not. Know that we are working on a system in order to make that system stronger. And we thank our panelists for being a part of the solution by helping to make that system stronger. The most important things are to be aware of what to do and what not to do. Remember to stay calm. Remember to exercise your right to remain silent. Remember to ask for a lawyer, and it's okay. Please state your disability. There's nothing wrong with that. And remember what not to do. Do not resist. Do not volunteer information. Do not argue with the officer. Practice and train for these encounters, because the more you practice something, the more innate it will become. So practice and train for these encounters and be prepared. We hope that you never need to use any of these tactics, but if you do, being prepared may genuinely save your life. We want to thank all of our panelists today. We thank you, Kimberly Watts. We thank you, Brian Kelmer. We thank you, Dr. Darianson Carter. We thank you, Jeremiah. We thank you, Harleen. We thank you, Dina. We thank each and every one of you for being here and sharing your stories. We're capturing everything that we can, and we will share everything that we have to ensure that you have access to everything that you need. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Ty, for all of
Thank
us
you,
pulling
Ty.
together to make this possible.
Yeah, and a special thank you to Carleen for facilitating. I think you did a beautiful job in bringing this all together for us. Have a great night and look for those resources very soon.